I hold something against my dad after all these years. And it was a mistake, and it was just before Christmas, and my grandparents were coming to visit. Now, I happen to know, because we weren't allowed in there, that Mom would wrap the gifts and things and put them in the closet in her own bedroom. And I knew this, and we all knew this. This was common family knowledge. And we were told not to look, because if you do, you'll just have a very boring Christmas. Like, you'll know everything, and it won't be fun to open the gifts. And so we knew this, and we all pretty much just agreed, we're not going to peek. We're not going to do that. That's not us, right? So we decided. So one day, my grandparents were coming to visit, and wouldn't you know it, they stayed in my parents' bedroom when they came to visit. And so I was tasked with making the bed, finishing up that room before they got there. And without thinking, I had an extra blanket from the bed. Without thinking, I opened the door to their closet to put the blanket in there, and I saw all the Christmas presents covered with another blanket so we couldn't see them. And I closed the door as fast as I could, and I felt so guilty. And I went to my dad, and I said, Dad, I want you to know, I opened the closet door in your bedroom, and I saw the Christmas presents sitting there under the blanket, and he just launched in. Well, if you wanted to ruin Christmas, well, you could just go right ahead. If you want to go look, we went to all that work and all that trouble, and it just went on and on and on. And by the end, I was crying, and I was so upset, because I was like, I didn't mean to. And then a little bit later, I thought about it, and now I'm mad about it, and I've been mad about it for about 20 years. Like, I really do want to, go back to that, but it's like, it's too late now. He's not going to remember this ever happened. But I meant so well. I was trying to be helpful, But for some reason, it's just how I still hold on to it, Oh, it's always kind of been this way. I kind of still hold on to that kind of thing in my life. And the funny thing is, we can always fall into that pattern of, oh, it's always been this way. This is just how it is. It never happens to get any better. There's an old joke about churches, right? My grandmother donated that light bulb, script and saved, and if that light bulb was good enough for her, it's good enough for the rest of us, right? Doesn't matter if it hasn't lit for the last 20 years. Tony Campolo tells the story about how, as his neighborhood that he grew up in changed, and it began to fill with people of a different race. Well, he used to be Italian and slowly became African American, and as a result, many of his friends and neighbors moved away. And his dad said, "We're not going anywhere. We donated the collection plates. They're silver and gold. We gave those. We're staying, and that's our church." And the church changed, and he learned a lot. He learned a lot about different cultures and change, brought change to them as well. There is this sense in today's story, the story of Elijah, there's sort of a common feeling that Elijah is facing, and it's when you're trying to promote change in a culture that is vastly against it. And so Ahab and Jezebel are on the thrones of Israel, and they're terrible, terrible people. And one of the things that they've done is that they've had all the prophets of God arrested and murdered and put to death. And now Elijah is the only remaining prophet of God left in the entire country. At this particular moment, the Ahab and Jezebel are encouraging the people to worship the goddess Asherah and the god Baal. And there's Asherah is a Sumerian moon goddess, and Baal is a fertility god. And together they're supposed to work together to populate the earth with green things. However, Baal and Asherah are, of course, not supposed to be worshipped by the children of Israel. We all know our 10 Commandments, right? Thou shalt have no other gods before me, and there are no other gods besides me. So the idea of the children of Israel being forced by their leaders to worship other deities, well, it's bringing a lot of issues. And so Elijah finally decides, he sends out a letter to all the people all over the town and says, "Tell you what, bring the prophets of Baal to one of the high places, and I'll be there too, and we'll have a showdown, and we'll figure out exactly who is God over Israel." And so what happens is that they gather together on the mountain. He says, well, each of us are going to present a sacrifice to our gods. And whichever God accepts the sacrifice, that will be the God over Israel. So all of the prophets of Baal build up a big pyre, and they put their offering on the top, and they begin to pray, asking that fire will come down from heaven to set fire to their offering. And when that happens, they will know that Baal and Asherah are the gods of Israel. And so all day long, they continue to pray. And as the time goes on, they get more and more frantic, and they begin to cut themselves, hoping that by the blood that's issuing forth from their wounds, their gods will start to pay attention. And pretty soon, sometime about, I'd say 3 o'clock in the afternoon, Elijah starts goading them a little bit. Hey, where are your gods? They don't appear to be doing much. What's going on here? And then he says, and the translation's trying to make this more calm, but the reality is this is what he said. This is the Hebrew, folks. What he says is, are your gods on the toilet? Are they indisposed? And pretty soon the prophets of Baal realize that nothing is going to happen. And so Elijah goes, and this is one of the sadder moments in the text. It says, Elijah went over and repaired the altar of the Lord. It had been so neglected that he has to put it back together first. And then he lays out his sacrifice on top of it, and he tells the people, bring some water, pour it over the offering. And they do this 3 times, so that the trench that's used to catch the blood of the offering around them is completely filled with water and blood. It's a really disgusting image, but it's the reality of what happens. And he begins to pray, oh Lord, show them, and then he doesn't even finish. And the fire comes down from heaven and consumes the entire offering and burns up all the water, licks up all the water in the trench. And the people realize that the Lord is the God over Israel. And Elijah says, these people have brought death to all of God's prophets, now let's bring death to them. And all the prophets of Baal are summarily executed, one right after the other. And after this marvelous victory, he receives word that Ahab and Jezebel are putting all of their resources into destroying Elijah rather than repenting. Here he is. He has definitively proven that God is the God over Israel. Here he is. He has placed himself in danger, life and limb, and here he is, and he's just had this marvelous victory. And what happens? But what does he get for it? Does he get to celebrate? No, he gets death threats. And so we see he has to run away. And so he runs for his life. And he comes to the place Beersheba in Judah. And he leaves his servant there, and he goes on for another day's journey into the wilderness. And he sits down under a broom bush. I looked it up. They're not pretty bushes. He sits down and he prays to God. I've had enough. Take my life. I'm no better than my ancestors. And then he lay down under the bush and he falls asleep. An angel wakes him up. Get up and eat. He looked around, and there by his head was some bread baked over hot coals, a jar of water. He eats and drinks, but he's so tired he lays down again. Then the angel of the Lord comes back a second time, tells him, get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you. So he gets up and he eats and he drinks. And strengthened by that food, he travels 40 days and 40 nights until he reaches Mount Horeb, the mountain of God, and there he goes into a cave and waits. And then the word of the Lord comes to him, and I love what God has to say. What are you doing here, Elijah? Elijah, what are you doing? This is one of the better questions parents have to ask their children. What are you doing? Nothing. Looks like you're doing something. No, I'm doing nothing. Doing nothing. Hey, you got a guilty look on your face. You sure you're not doing anything? I'm doing nothing then. What are you doing here, Elijah? And he replies, I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put the prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left, and now they're trying to kill me too. Go and stand out on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for I'm about to pass by. And suddenly there's a great and terrible wind, but God is not in the wind. And after that there's an earthquake, but the Lord is not the earthquake. And then all of a sudden a mighty fire comes, but the Lord is not the fire. And after the fire came, Elijah hears a gentle whisper. And then Elijah hears it and he knows it's God. What does God say? What are you doing here, Elijah? Elijah repeats, I've been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, torn down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. I'm the only one left, and now they want to kill me too. Did you notice, by the way, that these passages are exactly the same, exactly repeated? This is a Hebrew trick. They're trying to remind you how important that this is the summary of the argument. This is the thesis statement. This is what they want to underline. This is just how deep and dark and terrible the situation is. Elijah is facing death. Elijah doesn't know what to do anymore. Elijah is tired. And rather than God saying, well, just lay down and get some rest, just it's no big deal, calm down, here's a teddy bear, here's something to make you feel better. No, instead God says, go back the way you came. But that's the last thing he wants. The people are waiting, people are trying to find him and kill him back there. You want me to go back there? And God's message is, keep going back. Go back to the desert of Damascus, and when you get there, I want you to commit an act of treason that will bother Ahab and Jezebel even more. I want you to anoint a new king over Israel. In other words, what has Elijah gotten for all his good work? He has to do more good work. What has Elijah gotten for all the death threats? He's going to get more death threats. And so Elijah has to return to his work, because it is a work that needs to be done. The reality is, the difficult things in our lives, the difficult things in our culture, the difficult things that we're trying to overcome, trying to battle against, all of these things are works that can wear us out to no end. I use the example with the children of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. because he was a person who found himself getting really exhausted by his work. When you think of the work of great people like Mother Teresa of Calcutta, who continually cared for the dying and for the sick, it wearied her to an insane degree. And so often when she was finished with one good work, she just had to move immediately on to the next. And the alternative is actually quite seductive. The alternative is to just sit back and say, well, it's always been that way, right? It's always been that way. We don't have to worry about it so much because it's always been that way. But here's the problem with that kind of thinking. Just because something has continued on doesn't mean we don't have to stand against it. If we took that tack, if we allowed that kind of thinking to seduce us, well then we'd never be out of diapers, would we? The baby just got here. Yeah, it keeps doing that all the time. Oh well, that's just what it does. It's always been this way. I thought at one point it would walk, but no, it's just always kind of laid there, so... This kind of thinking, this kind of thing is what destroys us as a culture. Well, I guess people are always going to lie and steal. I guess there will always be corruption. We might as well just get used to it, right? We might as well just deal with the fact that people lie. So why would we do the hard work of legislating and regulation? And why would we do all these things? Because people are just going to do it anyway. The reality is this kind of thinking makes us apathetic to the pain in the world. Elijah very well could have just sat under his broom tree and died. But the reality is the good work needed to continue. And if he had done that, if he had laid down in the ditch and could no longer continue to fight for God, well, I guarantee you, we wouldn't have the entire Old Testament story today. Moses and Aaron and Zipporah, all of those people would be lost to us if Elijah has not continued to do as God commanded. The reality is that today is graduation Sunday, and there is a sense that we can always say, well, culture's always kind of been this way, right? People have always lied. People have always done the wrong thing. We never really have taken very good care of our world. We never really have, we want everyone to have the health care that they need, but it's always kind of been this way. We can just look at these sorts of issues and we can just lay down in the furrows and sit down under the broom tree and say, it's always been this way. It's always been like this, right? It's never been any better. But the reality of Elijah's story is a story where he has to continue to speak God's words and to speak truth into a world, into a culture of lies. Ahab and Jezebel do not have a very good end. But Elijah's faithfulness leads him into a chariot of fire that takes him up into heaven. While he's in his body, he still has his body today. He's up in heaven. He is glorified beyond what most human beings would ever experience. And that is the reality of fighting the good fight, of walking that long road, of not just sitting there and saying, this is how it's going to be. This is just how it's going to be. This is how our world's going to be. It's just going to be like this. The reality is when the problems that we as a culture are facing, the problems of pollution and the problems that it's causing for us in our world, the problems of racism, the problems of sexism, we can just lay down if we wanted to and say, this is how it's going to be. But that means we'll never